Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Quantum Alignment Show. I apologize for the few-minute delay in going live. We had some technical difficulties on the back end, but we're all set now. So, my name is Betsy, and I'm really happy to be here with you today to talk about authenticity and vulnerability. And this seems to be a theme that's up for a lot of people. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can get started. Okay, here we go. So today we're going to be talking about living an authentic life and finding the courage to be vulnerable. I love this quote: "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," said Carl Jung. So I want to start today by telling you a story. My daughter goes to a Waldorf school, and I just went recently to their Fall Festival of Courage, which was an amazing performance with a full puppet dragon, and all the different grades played different roles, and it was amazing. And they told this story, and I just loved it. So I'm going to do my best to retell it as a summary in the way that I heard it. And I'm going to start with that story today. So once upon a time, on the top of a very tall mountain, a dragon was awakened. And this dragon, it fed off of fear and envy, and the smoke from its nostrils blackened the sky, and its fiery breath scorched the earth, and its long swishing tail destroyed the trees and the forests. And it left destruction in its wake everywhere it went. And the earth, she cried out, and she said, "Can anyone rise up? Can anyone come and face this dragon and defeat this dragon?" And so first the fairies awoke, the little magical ones, and they said, we will rise and we will fight the dragon. And they tried, but they could not defeat the dragon. And then the gnomes, the little people of the stone and earth, arose, and they said, we will fight the dragon. And they tried, but they could not defeat the dragon. And then the stars, shining up on high, they shone down, and they said, we will shine our light bright, and we will defeat the dragon. And the humans had become so accustomed to artificial light, and they couldn't see them shining, and they could not defeat the dragon. And then the trees and the plants and the deep-rooted ones awoke, and they said, we will fight the dragon. And they tried, but they could not defeat it. And then the animals, the four-leggeds and the birds and the winged ones and the creepy crawlers arose, and they said, we will fight the dragon. And they could not do it. And the dragon, with each triumph, became stronger. And the earth, she cried out, and she said, can anyone defeat this dragon? Can anyone save us? And finally, the humans stepped forward, and they said, only we can defeat what we have awakened, and we will fight the dragon. And as they stepped forward and took this responsibility, the dragon's powers began to weaken. And they said, oh, look, it's working. And then first the dragon was stunned, and then it became even more angry and more violent. And they said, it's working, but we must band together. We must join our power together and connect to peace, because the smoke from the dragon's nostrils is the smoke that has been clouding our own vision, and the fire the dragon breathes is the fire within our own hearts. And if we come together as one and we ground in peace, then we can do this. And they encircled the dragon, and they faced the dragon within themselves. And as they did, the dragon's powers grew weaker and weaker, until finally it was so tame that even a child could ride it. And the earth and the animals and the stars and the plants and trees and the gnomes and the fairies all celebrated, and the humans celebrated too. And as they did, they sang, when we conquer the dragon in our hearts, then our real human work can start. So I love this story, and I loved the performance. And it felt really very appropriate for what we are facing collectively right now. So I don't know if you all got to watch Karen's weekly transit report this week, but the transits that are up right now are really supporting us in bringing truth to light. So we have the gate 57, which is the gate of intuition and instinct in the sun right now. We have the earth in the gate 51, the gate of initiation or shock. And we have Jupiter, the planet of blessings, in the gate 26, the gate of integrity, and really supporting us. And the more we live in higher states of integrity, the more blessings that we're going to bring into our reality, both individually and collectively. So we really have energy right now that's bringing up some shocking truths, some big initiations with really the higher purpose of realigning us with integrity. So, you know, like the dragon, we're kind of being invited to look at where the shadow lives within ourselves that's reflected in our outer reality. Where are we out of alignment? And these underlying truths are being revealed so that we can illuminate what needs to be shifted in order to create the world of harmony that we're really, really longing for. A lot of us kind of spend our lives really avoiding looking at these things, avoiding looking at the shadow, avoiding looking at what's painful, what's scary. And that makes sense, you know, for us to stop looking at, to turn away from those things. But I think sometimes when we do that, you know, we end up avoiding not just the scary things, but on the flip side, a really full life of what comes, you know, after those scary things or along with those scary things. And we kind of live in this almost partially numbed out reality, and we don't realize there's more that we might be missing. And so the key to really shifting out of this is awareness. We have to be willing to look at these hard things. And looking at these hard things is vulnerable because, like I said, we spend our whole lives trying to avoid pain. Why would we want to feel it, right? And leaning into pain or things that feel hard or scary on purpose just isn't something that we're naturally inclined to do, but it's what we have to do. And right now, with the planetary transits that are happening, with the energy that's up in the world for the last couple of years, I'd say we're kind of being forced into that space, right? The cosmos is kind of saying, you know, you can't not look anymore, right? We need to look at these things in order to heal them. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what vulnerability actually is. And my favorite resource for looking at vulnerability is Brené Brown. If you don't know her work, I highly recommend checking it out. She's written a number of books. She also just this past year released an amazing special on Netflix that I highly recommend looking at. So a lot of what I'm going to be, or pretty much all of what I'm going to be talking about here comes from her and her research. So Brené Brown says the vulnerability is having the courage to show up and be seen, even when you can't control the outcome. Vulnerability is feeling uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. You simply aren't being vulnerable if you aren't risking something. Or another way to say it is, you kind of can't be vulnerable if you need to stay comfortable. If you're not willing to get a little uncomfortable, you're not really exploring vulnerability. So we avoid vulnerability because it's kind of the center of all those things we avoid, right? Shame, scarcity, fear, anxiety, uncertainty. We don't want to feel those things. But what we don't realize is that all of those things come along with the most meaningful and fulfilling parts of life, with love and belonging and joy. And these are things that we're hardwired for. We're hardwired for love and connection. But love is inherently vulnerable, right? I mean, you can never be guaranteed that you're not going to be hurt, that you're not going to lose someone you love, right? And so is it really better to never love, to never receive these amazing, joyful parts of life in order to keep yourself safe and avoid the pain that comes along with it? I love this. So interestingly, from the research, Brené Brown says that actually fitting in is the opposite of true belonging. Because what you're doing when you're fitting in is you're kind of assessing and acclimating all the time. Who do I have to be accepted? What do I need to say? What do I need to do? How do I need to dress? How do I need to be in order to fit in, right? And that's where we've been talking a little bit about, you know, putting yourself kind of in a box. You know, as you kind of fit yourself into how you feel you need to be accepted, you make yourself kind of smaller and smaller. But that's not true belonging, actually. Belonging, says Brené Brown, is belonging to yourself first. It's not betraying yourself for other people. It doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And that is inherently vulnerable. So let's take a little bit of a look at where vulnerability lives in the human design chart. And I just want to give the side note that this is kind of an overview of maybe some of the more I don't want to say obvious, but kind of highlights of some of the places it lives in the human design chart. This is not an exhaustive list. There certainly are many other places that vulnerability can show up, but these are some of the main places that you definitely might see it. So let's start by looking at type. So manifestors have this beautiful internal creative flow, right? They have this divine creative flow that lives within themselves. But unlike generators, manifesting generators, or even projectors who have something to respond to know what might be right for them or not. Manifestors really have to operate with that creative flow by trial and error. And so when that creative flow is not received well, when they try things that they're really passionate about and, they quote unquote fail or don't catch, that can feel really vulnerable. Generators and manifesting generators, they really are here to be aligned with the right work and achieve mastery. And when they get stuck on a plateau, or when they're actually not aligned with that right work and they feel like their purpose isn't manifesting in the world, and they're feeling that deep frustration and angst about not fulfilling the work they're here to do, that can feel really, really vulnerable. Projectors often are told they aren't living up to other people's ideas of success. They're not here to work the way that, generators and manifesting generators are. And if they push too hard and burn out to try to live like the other types, and they aren't living up to this idea people have of how they should be, that's very vulnerable. And a reflector, they have this natural strategy built in, right? They need 28 days to make decisions. They need time, and our society is not built like that. So when they don't have enough time to make decisions and know that the direction they're taking in their life and the decisions that they're making are really aligned, that's really vulnerable, really vulnerable. So looking at the lines of the profiles, a first line profile is a foundational line. It really feels a need to have this foundational knowing and foundation of information, and a kind of a fear of uncertainty or not knowing. So without that ability to gather information and have that foundation of knowledge, that can feel really vulnerable for them. The second line really needs alone time in order to integrate. They need that time to restore. If they don't get it, that feels really vulnerable. The third line is an explorer and an experimenter. It's supposed to be out there in the world, experimenting with life and figuring things out by trial and error. And a lot of times they're criticized for making mistakes, which of course are never mistakes because they're just learning, right? But to other people, that's what they tell them: you're making mistakes, you can't do anything right. And that's really vulnerable. They're just following exactly their learning style and what they're here to do. The fourth line is another foundational line that really needs and craves stability in their foundation. Stability of home, stability of relationships. And when that stability is out of place, that feels really vulnerable for the fourth line. The fifth line, of course, lives in a projection field, and oftentimes they exist with a fear of that projection, of people really projecting onto them the things they need to do, be, say, to live up to their expectations. And that feels really vulnerable. The sixth line is born with this knowing of a big mission. They have this big mission they're meant to fulfill. And there's a number of things for the sixth line. A lot of times they have a fear of failing that mission. Oh my God, I'm going to die and never have done what I came here to do. Or maybe they even have a fear of the bigness of their mission. Do I have what it takes to do this? Or, with the three distinct life phases of the sixth line, a lot of times sixth lines can have a fear of divine timing, particularly when they're on the roof and they kind of feel this urgency that they need to be getting out and doing their purpose, and the timing isn't aligning yet. And they lose that faith, and all of that just feels really, really vulnerable for the sixth line. In openness by center, each center kind of has its own unique way that it can feel vulnerable when it's open in particular. So of course the head and the root center are both pressure centers. The head feels the pressure to figure things out, and the root center feels the pressure to get things done when they're open. And that pressure is constant, right? And a lot of times people kind of succumb to that pressure and just get either really stuck in their thoughts or really stuck in needing to do things in order to be free. And that's kind of a hamster wheel. The open ajna can feel really vulnerable in not being certain. It really craves and is seeking certainty. The open throat, when it feels a lack of recognition, or a lot of times people with an open throat can feel very unsupported or unseen. And they're pushing with this energy that they don't have to try to feel seen, and people aren't honoring the wisdom that they have to share. That feels really vulnerable. The spleen, of course, is the center for intuition. It's also the center that carries a lot of fear. And sometimes that fear can lead to being stuck in the past as well. Fear itself is very, very vulnerable. The emotional solar plexus has, when it's open, a real need to keep people happy. And that, of course, can lead to a lot of actions that might want you to fit in or fit yourself in a box. So when you speak your truth with an open emotional center, that's very vulnerable, because you don't know how it's going to be received, if you receive criticism from speaking that way. The open G center works with a theme of not necessarily always feeling accepted or loved for who you are. That's the identity center. The open will is the center for knowing our innate value. The open will can question that value. And the open sacral can really struggle with not knowing when enough is enough. So these are all really vulnerable places for openness within the centers. And themes of lessons that maybe you're here to learn if you have openness in these centers, but maybe that these are all places where you've felt vulnerable if you have openness in any of these centers. And then there are some places in the human design chart where there are just some innate propensities for sensitivity. So gate 19, if you have the gate 19, that is part of the channel for love and marriage, but it is a highly sensitive gate. It actually amplifies the sensitivity of all the rest of the chart if you have the gate 19 defined. And this is really a gate that really, really desires that love and belonging, true belonging, to feel loved and accepted. And so that's a highly sensitive place in the chart. If you have any center defined, or channel, any channel defined from the G center to the throat, that's a very vulnerable configuration, because what you're doing is you're speaking directly from who you are. You're speaking from your deeply authentic self. So if you speak from that authentic place and then it's not received, or you get criticized, or people reject it, that really can feel like an attack on who you are at the core. And then openness in general, where we're open is a place where we're taking in the energy of others and we're amplifying it. So sometimes if you identify with that energy and it's not actually you, there can be some misalignment there. Amplifying the energy of others can feel very intense. And it can feel really vulnerable and can also make you feel out of control. You're running this energy that isn't necessarily yours, and it feels very intense and big, right? And that can feel out of control and vulnerable. So again, that was not an exhaustive list, but just some big places where you might feel vulnerability according to your design. So vulnerability is really built into our design. And when we're living out of alignment, if we're living out some of maybe the lower expressions of different parts of our strategy, our type, or our definition, or even our openness, then, or even if we're experiencing fear of rejection for being who we are, there's really the propensity to be vulnerable in those ways. So no matter what, being authentic is just vulnerable. It just is. And most of us, we talked about this earlier, with this sense of really being hardwired for belonging, we're kind of conditioned to live in a box. And that box, for a lot of us, is too small for who we are. We're shrinking down parts of ourselves in order to fit in and be accepted. And so the very act of stretching beyond the limits of what people expect you to be acceptable, is vulnerable. And a lot of times people will actually tell you, who do you think you are? You can't do that. That's not possible, right? Maybe you've heard that. And they'll tell you to get back in the box. Oh, you're stretching a little too wide and a little too big here. That wasn't what we agreed on. Can you just hop right back in there, please, where we can all be comfortable around you, right? A lot of times people do that because they themselves are not willing to stretch outside of the box of what has become acceptable. And they themselves are so afraid of being vulnerable that they're afraid to move outside of anything that's comfortable or accepted. They need to know what's going to happen, but that doesn't mean that you have to conform to those expectations either, right? That's their choice and that's their journey. So now I want to talk a little bit about resiliency. So let's start by kind of defining what resiliency is. I love these definitions. This is according to Merriam-Webster, the dictionary. Number 1, resiliency is the ability of something to return to its original size and shape after being compressed or deformed, like, say, if you were being put in a box. And number 2, an ability to recover from or adjust easily to adversity or change, right? So being authentic and being who you are requires resiliency. People are always going to try to fit you into their boxes. Do you have the ability to regain the original size and shape of who you are, your bigness, after people are trying to compress you, right? Do you have the ability to recover when facing adversity, which is just a part of life, right? And a lot of times I think when we struggle or we hit some big setbacks, those are big times when we say, oh boy, maybe I shouldn't have tried that, or that clearly was not okay for me to do that, or I can't, right? And we start shrinking back down when we've tried to be big and it isn't received or it doesn't work. Can you recover? Can you bounce back and say, all right, I got knocked down on that one, I'm getting back up and trying again. So the first key to resiliency, and I don't know if you've ever heard Karen talk about her 9 keys to resiliency. She talks about 9 key traits that really identify whether a person is living in alignment and whether or not they have the resiliency to stay in alignment with their authentic selves. So I'm not going to talk about all 9 today. I'm going to talk about 4 of them that I think are really key to this discussion. So the first is courage, and that's because it really takes courage to be vulnerable enough to show up authentically, or if you haven't been showing up authentically, to acknowledge the gap between where you are now and how you've been showing up, maybe how you've been fitting yourself into boxes or shrinking yourself down, between that and who you truly are. And to start examining, where am I out of alignment? And looking at those shadowy, scary, kind of painful parts that we might not want to look at. So how have you been fitting yourself into a box in order to be accepted or loved, to be received, to fit in, right? That takes courage. It takes courage to be vulnerable. So when you're looking at courage and you want to know how courageous you are, some questions to ask. Are my fears keeping me from doing what my heart and soul are calling me to do? And feel free, I invite you actually, if you want, to take out a journal or piece of paper, really contemplate these questions, and if an answer comes to you, feel free to write it down. These are really good contemplations. And then if anything comes up for you, a second really great question is, what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to my awareness for me to move forward with courage and faith? Once we have the courage to really be vulnerable, that's when we can start to actually live authentically. Because, as we discussed before, authenticity simply takes vulnerability, because what we're doing is we're risking being seen. We're risking that that authentic self might not be received well. So the first thing you got to have in place is that courage. And then you can start to make the decisions and the actions that really feel aligned with who you are, with your heart, with your soul, with your belief systems, with what you truly deeply desire and what you wish for and what you feel you're here to do. And you can be that person no matter how it may be received by others, right? And you get to live from your truth. I heard something recently, a study that said that actually, in truth, how you're received by other people is not at all a reflection on you ever. It's a reflection on the person who's witnessing you. So if you're an artist and you take your painting to a gallery and they say, oh no, this is terrible. Well, that actually is not a reflection on your painting is terrible. It's that that specific person doesn't like that kind of painting. Let's say that you put your work out there and 1,000 people come back and say, this is the worst painting I've ever seen. Again, I'd challenge you to say, probably not a reflection on the actual painting or your talent or who you are as an artist. It's a reflection on maybe where collective consciousness is right now. Maybe collective consciousness is not ready for whatever you are offering. It is not a reflection on the worthiness, the value, the goodness of what you are offering. So the ability to stay aligned with your authentic self, no matter how it is received, is truly living authentically. So questions to ask about authenticity. The first I would start with is, do I feel safe and supported to be who I truly am? Do you feel safe and supported to be who you truly are? And I'd also invite you to ask, what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to my awareness for me to fully express my greatness? Again, I encourage you in this moment, if you feel like an answer is coming and you want to write that down, go ahead. Finally, once you have that piece of authenticity in place, you've had the courage to be vulnerable, you've had the courage to show up and start actually making authentic choices that feel aligned. It's really important to have lovability and self-worth in place to sustain that authenticity, right? Because otherwise, if you put your art out there and 1,000 people come back and say, this is terrible, do you know the innate value of the work you're offering? And do you know that the work you're offering really is worthy of being loved? If not, it's so easy to just jump right back in that box and be like, oh my God, nobody loves it. All these people are telling me this is terrible. It must be terrible. And I just shouldn't even be an artist anymore. Forget it. I thought this was my purpose, but it's not what I meant to do. I'm just going to go back to working a 9-to-5 a desk job, right? So You have to know that your authentic self is worthy of love and belonging. And a lot of times, anchoring yourself in that vibration of knowing your innate worthiness, knowing your innate lovability, actually is the energy that attracts the right people into your life who are going to value who you are. And it kind of keeps you from jumping back into that box because you're like, you kind of take love anywhere you can get it if you don't believe that you are truly lovable for who you are authentically, right? And then the worthiness piece, do you know your innate value? If we don't, we kind of let that value be determined by outside forces. And then that just sends us right back into the box. So for lovability, I encourage you to ask yourself, can I be loved for who I truly am? Can you be loved for who you truly are? And I also encourage you to ask, what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to your awareness for you to be completely open to giving and receiving love? And for self-worth, do I know that I am innately precious and valuable? Do you know that you are innately precious and valuable? You are. And second question, what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to my awareness for me to fully claim my preciousness? Most of us really want to live an authentic life. And I think that if we're out of alignment, on some level, we really do know it, right? There's a part of us that always knows and kind of itches at the back of our mind, right? When we're not showing up fully, when we know there's more we could be, do, have. We want a life that's in alignment with our beliefs and our passions and the truth of who we are. We just don't know if we can have it. Or maybe we're afraid of the criticism or the judgment we'll meet when we do. Or maybe we're afraid we can't have it. And again, that's where all those keys to resiliency come in and where the willingness to be vulnerable comes in. So the next time you're doing something and you feel vulnerable, I will encourage you to feel the fear and do it anyway. Now, I will insert the caveat. There are some times, and this is a discernment on your part, where, if you're a highly intuitive person, it's like sometimes you get a no on something and it's because it's really out of alignment. So I get that, honor it. But I think a lot of the times, the reasons that we feel fear are reasons that, our being is trying to keep us safe, and the box is safe, right? So if you feel afraid, or if you're feeling really vulnerable, if you're feeling those kind of trigger moments of, do you feel uncertain? Do you feel at risk? Do you feel emotionally exposed? Try leaning into it, because it might be a sign that you're actually on a path that's aligned with who you are, right? So I encourage you to experiment with that. Okay, so we've talked about some of the ways to maybe look at what internal factors might be contributing to keeping you from showing up authentically. I want to talk a little bit about some ways that we can actually move through patterns. And this is something that I realized. I've been doing a lot of work myself over the last few years. And this was something I realized where I shifted out of a big pattern maybe a year or two ago that took a really long time. And I kind of was reflecting back on it and realized, there were kind of 4 distinct phases to how I moved through that. And as I've talked to other people about it, they've said that they really feel this same pattern, either in how they've moved through things, or they can feel the alignment for them in something they want to do to shift patterns. So I want to share these steps with you today. If you're experiencing something that you feel maybe holding yourself back from your authentic self, if you're currently acting in a way that is out of alignment and is out of alignment, you've had a behavioral pattern or a mental pattern that you've wanted to shift, I encourage you to try or to look at it this way and maybe try these 4 steps. So a lot of us are kind of running on autopilot, where we have these patterns, behaviors, habits, decision-making strategies, thoughts that we've been operating on for so long that we're just on autopilot with them, right? It's instinctive to respond that way. And so to shift into new, more fulfilling patterns that really are more aligned with our authentic selves, which the universe is asking us to do right now, right? We kind of have to disrupt that autopilot. We have to disrupt the flow in order to break out of that box that we've been in, to break out of the pattern. So the first step for any of this is awareness. And I talked about this a little bit earlier about being willing to look at things, right? Transformation begins with the willingness to look. It begins with the willingness to see. If you're so afraid of the pain or the discomfort or the emotional exposure or the risk of really examining where you're at, you're never going to be able to shift it because you're just kind of, I guess for lack of a better analogy, you know, that's kind of what you see with an ostrich burying its head in the sand, right? It's like, nope, I'm not going to look at it. It's scarier to look at that thing than it is to shift it and see what's on the other side. So there has to be a willingness to look. I've found that both self-reflection and reflections from people that I love have been very helpful for me to help me show up as my best self. Make sure if it's loved ones that they're people that you really trust, know your authentic self and who you truly are and who you're leaning into wanting to be. If that's someone you're going to lean on for reflections of where you may be out of alignment. And then this willingness to be vulnerable really comes in here because you kind of have to admit that you're out of integrity. It's that piece from the dragon story of the human stepping up and saying, you know what, this dragon lives inside of us. We woke this dragon. We're the only ones who can defeat it. And only when they were willing to step up and do that did the dragon's, you know, powers start to wane. And so we have to admit that we're out of integrity, even knowing that shame might follow, even knowing that fear might follow, even knowing that anxiety or uncertainty or risk or exposure may follow. Because the benefit of getting to the point of shift, getting to the other side of it, has to outweigh the risk, right? Sometimes the awareness alone is all it takes. And I know that for me, sometimes with those resiliency keys we were talking about, you know, with courage, with authenticity, sometimes it's just checking back in with that all the time. Like, am I making courageous choices right now? Am I being authentic? Am I grounded in my self-worth and my lovability, and always coming back to that? And sometimes just the willingness to look shifts the whole thing. And I've had that happen. I know so many people that have had that happen. Because once you're aware of it, a lot of things just continue operating on an autopilot loop because they can, because it's a free-for-all, right? And nobody's stopping them. When you, in your authentic, grounded self, say, we're done, and I see you, right? Then it's like, oh, caught. And sometimes that shifts the whole pattern. Sometimes you need a little bit more. So after awareness then becomes, sometimes if it's a really deeply ingrained pattern, and I find that a lot of these are really helpful with behavioral patterns, that a lot of times awareness is the first step. You're like, okay, I see this thing I'm doing. I don't want to do it anymore, right? But you're still kind of on autopilot at this point. You see it, but you don't know what to do about it. So it's going to kind of keep showing up on that autopilot for a little while because it's so instinctive. So a lot of times you're going to say, okay, I want to shift this. And then you'll find yourself in a triggering moment and you're just going to do the thing that is instinctive to do because you've been doing it for so long. And you do it, and then the thing comes out of your mouth, or the thought comes up in your head, or the action happens and you're like, oh God, I did it again, right? Why did I do that? And so the second step after awareness is to learn to catch it. So each time that it happens and you recommit to shifting the pattern, over time, you will start to catch it sooner and sooner if you stay committed and you stay in the process. And so this feels like a really small first step, but it's really important because what it is it's the beginnings of turning that awareness you've developed into action, of catching it and getting to the place where you can ultimately disrupt the pattern. A lot of people will actually get discouraged at this step and they'll kind of quit. And because it does take time. This is an ingrained pattern. This is something you've been living in for a long time. And it's practice. It's working a muscle to get yourself out of the pattern of it. And so when you think you're not catching it fast enough and you just keep getting discouraged, some people are like, oh, well, this must just be who I am, or I can't shift it, or there's no way. And then they quit and they're like, whatever, I'm just going to accept that this pattern is a part of my being and I'm going to live with it forever. It is what it is. Keep going. At this stage. This is the most discouraging stage because you have the awareness, but you aren't quite able to fully shift it yet. And so you see where you want to go and you kind of feel like you're on a treadmill running and running and running and you can't get there, right? So don't quit at this phase. Keep going. I promise you it'll happen. The next phase is kind of the golden phase where you start to see the payoff. What happens here is that eventually when you get enough practice, you've been working the muscle of noticing it and committing to catch it, that at some point, along your work here, you're going to find that you have enough space to pause just long enough between your instinct to do the thing and you're actually doing the thing to make a decision about whether or not to do the thing, right? Like, let's say that you've been speaking to your partner, like you've been getting angry and yelling just instinctively, and you don't want to talk to your partner like that. It doesn't feel good, right? And so, every time a triggering moment happens and you've been trying to catch it and it flies out of your mouth, you yell or you scream or whatever. And finally, this day, something triggering happens and you open your mouth and the words don't fall out and your breath catches and you can go in your mind like, oh, I don't want to say it. I don't want to yell right now. And you close your mouth. And you still feel all that swirling anger and frustration inside from all the energy that wanted to come out your mouth but didn't. And you have to dissipate it. But then later you look back and you're like, oh my God, I had control in that moment. I disrupted the pattern. I was able to pause and I was able to choose in that moment to not act from the instinctive pattern I've been operating under. So this is when you kind of start to know that change is possible. And the more that you practice this phase also gets extended. So the pause might get longer and longer until eventually you're kind of more of an observer. Like maybe you feel that frustration arise in the moment and you kind of watch it and you're like, I really want to yell right now. And you sit with it and then it fades away, right? The pause. And then one day you find that you've shifted it. One day you look back and you're like, wow, I haven't done that thing in a while that I used to do. And it's surprising because it's become, you've reprogrammed the pattern. You've shifted out of it. And that's not to say you may not ever experience it again, right? Especially if you're under other triggering circumstances, if you're under a lot of stress. But you've already done this before and you know that you can do it now. And so you're kind of able to move back through the pattern more quickly. You're able to do it and it's less of a discouraging process. So those are kind of the 4 phases that I've noticed for, that you can kind of pay attention to when you're trying to shift a pattern. What stage are you in? Are you just becoming aware of something you want to shift? Maybe you came to this presentation today because you're like, oh man, I've been living inauthentically or out of integrity and I want to shift some things, but I don't know how. And you're at the awareness phase, Okay, well now how would you want to move into catching it, right? What are you trying to catch? What are some tools or tricks you could use that would work for you in those circumstances to catch and shift those patterns? Practice the catching it, practice the pause. As you move through the phases, notice, and if you're in the catching it phase and you're like getting so frustrated and you're like, oh, I can't do this, remember that's part of the process. And you can tell yourself, oh my gosh, I'm just in the catching it phase. This is the hardest part. I am able to do this. If I just keep going, eventually one day I'll get to the pause and I won't act on it anymore. And then after the pause is the shift, right? So I encourage you to know that the shift is possible. All right, so what did we talk about today? We talked about kind of a lot. I hope I didn't move through this too quickly. So the first thing is we have to look at the hard stuff. We have to. You can't heal what you can't see or what you're not willing to look at. You let things fester underneath the surface long enough and you just kind of settle into that's how you're living, and it's uncomfortable. It's not true to who you are, right? And like I said earlier, the universe kind of isn't letting us do this anymore, right? It's like, okay, you're not going to consciously choose to look at this. Well, here you go. I'm going to force it up into your face. Being authentic feels vulnerable. It just does. It just does. Being vulnerable takes courage. Brene Brown actually says that how brave you are is the marker they use to indicate how vulnerable you're willing to be. They're directly correlated. Know your inherent value. Know that you're innately precious, that you deserve love, that who you are is inherently lovable, inherently valuable. Carry that with you in your heart and your being. If anyone doesn't value or appreciate or love you, they're not your people. You just haven't found your people yet. When you do, they're going to see that value and they're going to love you for exactly who you are. And they wouldn't accept any less than that. And finally, you can shift anything. You really, really can. I believe it. I've shifted some really, really hard things over the last 5 years that I didn't think I could. And just shifting even one really hard thing made me understand that I really could shift anything. And so can you. I want to end with this quote from Brene Brown. Here's the thing. Vulnerability is hard and it's scary and it feels dangerous. But it's not as hard, scary, or dangerous as getting to the end of our lives and having to ask ourselves, what if I would have shown up? We need you. We need everybody to show up right now. This world is asking for it. We can create the most amazing things together. And I really want to see you being your authentic self. So that is what I have for you today, lovely people.
We did have some comments that came in both on Zoom and some comments on Facebook.
Sure.
Paige says, I'm being with seeing independent transportation work as only having the meaning I give it. That isn't there in the past. So I believe Paige is rewriting.
I love that. Paige.
Well, this will be a good, my husband has a 19 defined unopened. So in a relationship, when she still could be amping his 19.
Totally.
Correct.
So Paige, you might actually end up feeling that sensitivity even more strongly than him because you're amplifying that energy that he has. So when you're around him, you might find that you actually act or feel more sensitive even than he does. So the two of you together probably feel very sensitive because he has it defined. So he has that innate pattern and then you have it open and you're amplifying it. So together you're a pretty sensitive couple. Now remember, the 19 has a big gift in it too. I mean, its sensitivity really has the capacity to understand, to empathize, to create that belonging for others, right? So sometimes it's just also the awareness of, if you have that defined, you may have a pattern of innate sensitivity, of taking things really personally, of feeling that criticism or rejection or anything like that not being understood feels really, really vulnerable for you. So yeah, that might be a theme in your relationship for sure.
She goes on to say, how can we better connect with our innate worthiness and lovability? So
yeah.
I responded, that's a great question for her.
Yeah. Well, what I would actually encourage you to do, and I think someone else, a journaling question. Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest too. Those questions that I posted about what needs to be healed, released, aligned, and brought to your awareness, for you to know that you are innately valuable and for you to be open to giving and receiving love. I would sit with those. Sit with those, journal on that, maybe even make that a journaling exercise for you for the next week or two and see what shows up. Because I think it's different for different people, right? Because we all have issues with lovability or value in different ways, depending on what the circumstances of our life are or where we might have taken in some conditioning about those traits. So yeah, I would sit with that. I would sit with those and journal on them. And those are really great questions to explore.
I did want to put up, and this might be me, but it's not, a lot of times when you say journal, not everyone journals. Some people might write poetry, they might write a song, they might have it in their music.
True, or even
interpreted dance.
Or speak. I know some people who instead of writing will actually take their phone and they'll do that like voice memo recording thing and they'll just talk to themselves. They'll talk it out like to the ethers, right? And sometimes that helps too.
It's whatever works for and they will know innately what works for them, correct?
Paint something. Just use those questions as inspiration. Take them with you.
Stephanie says, thank you so much. This has come at the perfect time for me as I'm in the middle of my first Saturn return. Yay, Stephanie.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of my second.
Big lessons coming for you. I'm so glad.
It is time to be vulnerable and quit hiding.
Amen.
On Facebook, and this is just with the story, Sue mentioned in Facebook that dragon is considered a sacred creature in Asian mythology. Yeah. It's the Western perception has distorted his divinely created purpose.
That is 100% true.
Yeah, dragon fights in ego in man, and it's our ego that would wish to slay the dragon. Dragon is benevolent, ego is not.
Yes, and I think that, thank you for saying that as well. It's funny, Karen's daughter loves dragons, and I've actually learned a lot about dragons from her. She's 10. But you're 100% right. And I think that what I loved about that story is that these people were acknowledging that what was existing within them was being reflected in this dragon, right? That when they were feeling in their egos, envious, fearful, all of that, that was when the dragon was wreaking havoc, right? When they were able to take responsibility and reconnect to the love within themselves, the dragon became loving and peaceful, right? So I don't think the story is innately about the dragon in itself as much as the dragon was a reflection of,
Let's
of
say
people.
dragon is a reflector, huh?
Maybe it is.
Mary Elaine says, thank you so much. Beautifully done and so relevant.
Thank you.
On Facebook, Deanna Jean says, taking everything in that resonates. And it's so good. Authenticity. So you're getting lots of people that said that this was a very good time to hear things this time.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
And like how you ended.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad. Yeah, and I know Karen sent out in her email today, it's like there really is a sense of urgency right now, I think, that we're all feeling to show up in a different way. And that the places within ourselves that are misaligned or out of integrity, we are feeling them very deeply. And there's a reason for that. We're coming up on a time of big transformation. We're in a time of big transformation and change on the planet. We're creating something new right now. And what we're creating is really dependent on all of us showing up as authentically as possible, in our gifts as possible. You're a piece, as Karen likes to say, of the divine human puzzle. We don't have the whole picture when we're missing a piece. So you matter. Who you are matters. And I hope that you can, if nothing else, take that away today and remember that we want you showing up authentically. We really, really, really do. We need you. So
We'll repeat that again in a minute because that bears repeating. But I want to segue into, you are a human design level 3 specialist and also quantum alignment system level 1 practitioner. So if someone wanted to work more deeply with you, because part of why that, now I'm going to put words in your mouth, I'm sure you'll put them better, but part of why someone might want to get a human design reading is that would be, and I'm going to let you finish that. Why would they want to get a human design reading?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually just did a reading for someone yesterday who is really experiencing, we were talking about the openness she possesses in the different centers and some of the things she's experiencing. And we identified kind of this storm of like all the ways that all of the things she's struggling with are really connected to each other. And it's kind of like a Jenga tower, right? And it's like, well, how do you start untangling this? And, she told me that just through the reading, first of all, having somebody witness her and understand what she's feeling and kind of validate that she's not crazy, that these are all, valid ways of feeling, and validating the gifts that she possesses and helping her really examine where, these places she's struggling are coming from and what she might be able to do about them was really, really helpful and supportive for her. So I think that getting a human design reading really helps first and foremost with this awareness piece, and I think that people are already more aware than they think they are of where they're out of alignment or where their struggles are. They might just not feel valid in what they're experiencing, or they might not know what to do about it. And so I think that getting a human design reading can just be so helpful to really understand how you're designed, where these pieces of vulnerability or struggle might be coming from for you, and to just get some support in working through it. And I think a lot of times, when I said that sometimes awareness itself causes a shift, I see that all the time in human design readings, that people get a reading and suddenly they're like, oh my God, now that I see where this is coming from, it's like they give themselves permission to stand in who they are and to live out, the gifts of who they are. And to understand that if some of those pieces of who they are not being received, positively in their outer environment, it has nothing to do with you. Like I was saying, it has to do with them. And find your people, find your tribe, right? But so I think
it helps them to feel safe and be vulnerable
100%.
when they understand them more.
100%. And I think
the last part.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I don't want to take it, because I was just going to say the last part of your speech was dealing with the resiliency keys that Karen has, and sometimes people need more help than just the awareness. That's like this, the second or third step in
Yes.
going in there. And what the quantum alignment system, working with these resiliency keys and your chart, does is, see, I throw it back at you. What does that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes the biggest block that people have to get through, like, someone was asking, how do I walk more with lovability? How do I walk more with self-worth in my life? And I think that the quantum alignment system is the most powerful system that I've personally experienced. And it's why I wanted to train to be able to offer this for other people, to move through these stuck places and to build more resiliency and to regain, because I think, innately, we all actually have an innate sense of lovability. We have an innate sense of self-worth. It just gets covered over. Other stories come in that tell us we're not. And if we can move through whatever the experiences were or the stories are that are leading you to feel out of alignment with those resilient traits within yourself that are going to help you live more aligned, live more authentically, live a more fulfilled life, and show up the way you want to, this helps you move through it really just so quickly. I find people experience these profound shifts in working with the quantum alignment system. So yeah, if you're interested in working with me, you can book a reading with me directly. I actually, on my personal website, my readings through the end of the month are 33% off. So if you go to betsybatista.com, and on the very top in the menu, there's a box on the right-hand side that says schedule. And if you click on the schedule button, you will be taken directly to my scheduler. And that's the only place right now for you to get the discounted price. So you can book online through there if you want to get the 33% discount on a reading. And I would absolutely love to work with you. I just realized I don't have my quantum alignment session services on there, but if you book a human design reading and you actually want a quantum alignment session, you want to integrate that in, just leave me a note and we'll integrate that in, and it'll be the same price and it'll all work out beautifully. So I really love helping people through transformation and to help to understand how their vulnerabilities are actually strengths and to understand themselves better and step fully into who they are. So that's what I love about it.
And you did it very well during the talk here. I mean, even people just taking the 4 steps that you said that are leading to awareness and that, and integrating those in their health, that they might make big breakthroughs, just like you did when you found that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really just want you to know it's possible. I think sometimes when we're really stuck in a pattern, we just feel the stuckness of it. And I just wanted you to know it's possible to shift it. So, yeah.
Closing thoughts. I'm gentle dinging you.
Yes. Well, we have reached the end of our hour today. I really appreciate you all joining me. It was a pleasure to be here with you. If you have any questions for me, if you're thinking about working with me, you don't know, feel free to send me an email. You can contact me through my website as well. You can also find me on the Quantum Alignment System website under the Find a Human Design Specialist tab. I'm there as well. And I would love to be of service to you if this is something you want. Like I said, I really want to see you shining bright and showing up as authentically as possible. So thank you again, everybody, and have a beautiful rest of your Friday, a beautiful weekend, and I'll see you later.